For the Greet Friend example, we have seen how we will activate the Greetings button by including the appropriate handling code inside the main activity.java file. Now, handling of user interface events in Android requires you to implement appropriate UI handling code in the activity that is designed to host this user interface. Let us understand that a UI event is an action that is triggered by the user interacting with the user interface. So for example, when you touch a button, when you select a checkbox, or when you drag something on the screen, or when you press a key, or when you press the back button on your device, and so on. All these amount to user interface events being caused for your application. Now, if you are familiar with the event-driven programming paradigm, it becomes very clear to you how the implementation of the code proceeds. So we have an event source which generates the event. So for example, the button being touched, and this event then has to be handled by implementing an appropriate listener that will execute when that event occurs. So going back to our example, we see that we need to define event listeners and associate them with the different views that we include inside our Android user interface. Getting back to our code, we saw that we have the Greetings button, and when the user clicks on the Greetings button, we saw that we have implemented the way to get reference to the greet button in the code, and subsequently we saw how we implemented the on-click listener for the greet button, and inside the on-click listener we are able to extract the information from the edit text field and then use that to prepare an appropriate string and then display the string on the user interface. Now, this on-click method is the event listener that we have implemented. In addition, we have declared that the main activity will implement the on-click listener right within the code. And subsequently, we also specified that for the greet button, the on-click listener is implemented by the main activity. There are other ways of specifying the listener. You can either specify the listener in code or even define the listener in the XML code of your activity layout file. So to summarize, what we have seen is that the view class, which is the class that is the superclass for all the different UI widgets, defines a Java interface that contains a single callback method. When you define an activity that hosts a user interface, then for all the views that are included on the activities layout file, the activity will implement the interface callback method. So in the example, we saw that we have implemented the view on-click listener to be able to respond to when the button is clicked by the user. This is called by the Android framework when the view to which the listener has been registered is triggered by the user interacting with that widget. So when you click on a button, then the on-click listener corresponding to that button will be invoked. Similarly, if you touch at a particular point on the screen and if you have implemented the on-touch method, then that method will be invoked by the Android framework. So within Android, there are several callback methods that are available for a view class. These include on-click, on-long-click, and so on. But in particular, in the example that you just saw, we saw the use of the on-click method for responding to the user interaction with the user interface. We also saw a brief reference to the resources folder within the Android project, And we also saw how the layout is enclosed inside the layout subfolder of the resources folder. Now the resources folder comprises of all the resources that your application is making use of. What are resources? Resources are additional files or content that you supply for your application, and these are independent of the source code. Now, the reason why we separate the code from the resources is that we can independently update the resources without having to go and update the corresponding code. And resources that are used within your application include the layouts. We have seen that already. We could include images, perhaps PNG or JPEG images that we will include on the user interface. Menus, we will see menus in more detail in one of the subsequent exercises. Strings, we saw how we make use of the strings.xml file in order to store a string and then use that string within the code. Also you will see launcher icons and animation related XML files being stored in the resources folder. Now again, to emphasize, separating the resources from the code enables us many different things, including customizing the app for different devices. So for example, if you have an app that you designed for Android devices, it can automatically adapt itself to different screen sizes, different sizes of the device, for example, mobile phones or tablets, and so on. In addition, your app could also adapt to different locales. So for example, if a user is using an Android phone that is configured to use a language other than English, say for example French, German, Chinese, and so on, then within your code, if you include the strings specified in different languages, then your user interface can appropriately adapt itself based on the language, interface language that the user is using on his or her device. Now, we will not get into those details in this particular course, but there is sufficient explanation on the Android developers website for how you can customize your application for different locales and different languages. Now, when you access resources within your application, if you're accessing resources from your Java code, you would normally specify your resources by identifying it as r.resource_type.resource_id. So for example, we saw the use of r.layout.activity_main within the code. Similarly, when we were specifying the text view, we said r.id.textMessage within the Java code. You can also reference resources from within XML files that you include in the resources folder. In such cases, then you will identify the resource by specifying at and the resource type / the resource ID. So for example, at string.greet/greeting, at android:color.blue, and so on. Going back to our main activity.java, we saw how we used a resource called r.string.greetString in here in order to prepare the message that is displayed on the screen. Now, this r.string.greetString refers to a string resource that we have stored in the string.xml file. We have already seen how we do that in code in the previous lab exercise. Now that we have completed the GreetFriend example, let's go ahead and then do an assignment. In this assignment, you will be modifying the greeting app and display a greeting based on the time of the day. The details are available to you in the assignment description on the course site.